Welcome back to It Takes Two. I'm Ethan.
And I'm Naomi. Thanks for joining us for another week of diving into the tech world's biggest headlines.
And boy, do we have a big one today. It's a story that's been brewing for years, and it just took a dramatic turn.
Oh, you mean the ongoing saga between Apple and Epic Games? You know I love a good tech drama.
Exactly. The App Store battle just got a serious upgrade, or maybe a serious downgrade, depending on who you ask.
Right? Because there was a major ruling this week, wasn't there?
Massive. A U.S. federal judge came down pretty hard on Apple, saying they violated a previous court order.
Violated? Like didn't follow it? After all this time and all these court dates?
Precisely. Judge Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers in California made the ruling, and her language was, let's just say, pointed.
Ooh, pointed judicial language is my favorite kind of language. What did she say?
She said Apple was in willful violation of her 2020 own injunction. Willful is the key word there.
Willful? Meaning they meant to violate it? Not just an accident?
That's the implication. She specifically said Apple's continued attempts to interfere with competition will not be tolerated.
Wow. Okay, that's strong. So what exactly was the violation this time?
It goes back to that original injunction from 2020 own. Remember, that ruling mostly favored Apple, but it did say they had to stop their anti-steering policies.
Anti-steering. That's where developers couldn't tell users about cheaper ways to pay outside the App Store, right?
Exactly. The judge ordered Apple to let developers include links or buttons to alternative payment methods outside the app.
Right? Because Apple's standard 30 cut, the Apple tax as some call it, is a big chunk of revenue for developers.
A very big chunk. So the idea was to allow competition in payments, potentially lowering prices for consumers.
Okay, got it. So Apple was supposed to allow those links. What did they do instead?
Well, they did implement changes after the Supreme Court declined to hear the appeals last year, which effectively let the 2020 own injunction stand.
So they put the links in?
They allowed links, yes, but according to the judge, they put up barriers that made the links commercially unusable.
Commercially unusable. How do you make a link unusable?
A couple of ways they tried, according to the ruling. First, they started displaying big warning messages when users clicked the links.
Warning messages? Like, warning, you are leaving the safe and secure App Store? Trying to scare people?
That seems to be the judge's interpretation. Epic Games called them scare screens designed to deter users.
Okay, yeah. That sounds like classic platform control. Make the alternative look scary.
And the second thing they did was introduce a new commission.
A new commission? On purchases outside the App Store?
Yep, a 27 fee on purchases made by users within 7 days of clicking one of those link out buttons.
Wait. So developers put in a link to avoid the 30 Apple tax. And Apple said, okay, fine, here's a link, but we're taking 27 anyway?
That's essentially what Epic Games argued, and what the judge seems to agree with. It defeats the purpose of the alternative.
It totally does. Why would a developer set up a whole separate payment system and website just to save him easily 3? That infrastructure costs money.
Exactly the point. Epic Games contended that the 27 fee, combined with the warnings, made the alternative payment routes financially unviable.
Yeah, that makes zero sense from a business perspective for the developer. It's like Apple saying, okay, you can use the back door, but we're still going to charge you almost the same as the front door fee, and we're putting a giant sign on the back door saying, enter at your own risk.
That's a pretty good analogy, Naomi. The judge suggested Apple's changes had no purpose other than to stifle competition.
Boom. Laying down the law. And she didn't stop there, did she? I heard something about criminal contempt.
You heard right. This is where it gets really serious. Judge Gonzalez-Rogers referred Apple and its Vice President of Finance, Alex Roman, to federal prosecutors.
For criminal contempt? That's jail time kinda serious potentially?
Potentially, referral for investigation doesn't mean charges will be filed, but it's a huge escalation.
Why the VP of Finance specifically?
The judge said Roman's testimony regarding Apple's compliance efforts was replete with hidden and outright lies. That's a direct quote.
Whoa, calling out an executive by name and accusing them of lying under oath. That is not a good look for Apple.
Not at all. It suggests a deliberate effort to mislead the court and avoid compliance.
So it wasn't just a technicality. The judge thinks Apple actively tried to skirt the ruling and then lied about it.
That's the strong implication. The ruling also mentioned Apple misusing attorney-client privilege to delay things and obscure their decisions.
Okay, so the judge is basically saying Apple was being deliberately difficult, anti-competitive, and less than truthful.
Pretty much sums it up. She said Apple sought to maintain a revenue stream worth billions in direct defiance of the injunction.
Billions? That's how much is at stake with these commissions.
Apple themselves warned the court that losing this revenue could amount to substantial sums annually. Billions seems plausible.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit. Remind us, how do we even get here? This Epic versus Apple thing has been going on for years.
It started back in August 2020. Gakers of the wildly popular Fortnite filed an antitrust lawsuit.
Ah yes, Project Liberty. That's what Tim Sweeney at Epic called it, right?
Indeed, they intentionally breached their agreement with Apple by putting their own direct payment system into Fortnite, bypassing Apple's IEP.
And offering a 20% discount to users who used it, which was a direct challenge to Apple's 30% fee.
Apple's response was swift. They yanked Fortnite from the App Store and threatened Epic's developer accounts.
Which was a huge deal because Epic also makes the Unreal Engine, used by tons of other developers.
Correct. Epic then filed for a restraining order and the whole legal battle kicked off.
And they had that famous 1980 Fortnite ad parodying Apple's own 1984 ad, trying to paint Apple as the big, oppressive power.
A very clever, if aggressive, marketing move. So the first big ruling was in September 2020.
That's the one where Judge Gonzalez Rogers mostly sided with Apple, right? Said they weren't a monopoly in the mobile gaming market.
Yes, that was a win for Apple, but she did rule against their anti-steering policies under California law.
And that's the specific part of the ruling Apple was just found to have violated.
Precisely. That anti-steering injunction was supposed to take effect back in December 2020.
But then appeals happened.
Lots of appeals. Both sides appealed parts of the ruling. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals mostly upheld the original decision in April 2023.
Affirming the anti-steering part, but also confirming Apple was an monopoly.
Right. Then the Supreme Court declined to hear the full appeals in January 2024.
Which is when the original injunction, including the anti-steering part, effectively became final and binding.
Yes, and Apple then implemented their new policies allowing links, but with the 27 fee and the warning messages.
Policies that Epic Games immediately cried foul over.
Accusing Apple of blatantly violating the order in March 2024, which led to this latest ruling.
It's been a long, winding road. So, what does this new ruling mean right now?
Immediately, Apple is barred from hindering developers' communication with users about alternative payment options.
So, no more scare screens or restrictions on how developers present the links?
That's the intent. And crucially, Apple is now prohibited from imposing that new 27% commission on purchases made outside the App Store.
Okay, that's huge. Developers can actually direct users off-platform to pay without giving Apple a massive cut.
Potentially, yes. This could mean more revenue for developers.
And potentially lower prices for consumers if developers pass those savings along.
That's the hope for consumers. More choice in payment methods and maybe some savings.
What about Apple? Beyond the potential criminal contempt investigation, what's the impact on them?
They stand to lose that revenue from the 27% off-app commission, which, as we discussed, they said could be substantial.
Goodbye, potential billions from that new fee.
Exactly, and the finding of willful violation and the contempt referral is a serious blow to their reputation.
Definitely a PR nightmare. Apple lied to court is not a headline you want.
And it's likely to ramp up scrutiny from regulators and lawmakers, both in the US and globally.
Because other developers and regulators are watching this closely, right? This case sets a precedent.
Absolutely. It could embolden other developers to challenge Apple's fees and policies.
And maybe even put pressure on other platform holders, like Google with the Play Store, to loosen their restrictions.
That's a real possibility. It highlights the ongoing debate about the power these big tech companies have over their digital platforms.
So, what's been the reaction? I imagine Apple wasn't thrilled.
Apple put out a statement expressing strong disagreement with the decision.
Of course they did.
They said they'll comply with the order, but they also plan to appeal this ruling.
So, the legal battle continues. Surprise. Surprise.
Yep, they've already filed their appeal notice with the Ninth Circuit.
And what about Epic Games? Tim Sweeney must be happy.
Sweeney called it a significant win for developers and consumers. He's definitely pleased.
And the big news from Epic is that Fortnite is coming back to the App Store.
That's right. After being off iOS for over 3 years, Epic plans to relaunch Fortnite in the US App Store soon.
That's huge for gamers who play on iPhones and iPads.
Absolutely. It shows the immediate impact of this ruling on Epic's strategy.
Does Epic think this ruling finally forces Apple to truly compete on payment services?
Sweeney said it forces Apple to compete with other payment services rather than blocking them. That's their view.
Because without the 27 cut and the scary warnings, alternative payments suddenly look a lot more attractive.
Precisely, developers can now offer those methods without Apple taking a massive slice for doing, well, nothing related to that specific transaction.
What do analysts and industry observers think?
It's mixed, as always. Some see it as a major setback for Apple's control and a win for competition.
Makes sense.
Others are focused on the financial implications for Apple and how this might affect their profitable services division.
Because the App Store is a huge revenue driver for them.
A multi-billion-dollar driver, the criminal contempt referral is also getting a lot of attention.
Yeah, that's the part that makes this more than just a civil case about fees.
Exactly. It raises the stakes significantly and could have long-term consequences for Apple's legal standing.
And developers must be feeling cautiously optimistic.
That seems to be the mood. They welcome the ability to communicate freely and offer alternatives, but they'll be watching closely to see how Apple adapts.
Apple has a history of creative compliance, shall we say?
That's putting it mildly. Their previous attempt at compliance with the 27 fee is evidence of that.
And for consumers, any immediate changes besides the potential for Fortnite coming back?
Immediate changes might be subtle, but over time, if developers use these alternative payment options, we could see lower prices.
And more communication from developers about sales or special offers outside the app.
Yes, that anti-steering part is crucial for developers to reach their users directly.
So, where does this go from here? Apple is appealing. But the criminal contempt investigation is separate, right?
Correct. The appeal addresses the judge's finding of violation and the immediate orders. The criminal contempt referral goes to federal prosecutors to decide if they'll pursue charges.
Two separate tracks, both potentially significant.
Exactly. Apple will need to revise its App Store policies again to comply with this latest, stricter ruling.
And avoid further findings of non-compliance.
Crucially, and this case could have ripple effects globally.
Like influencing regulations in other regions?
Potentially, the EU's Digital Markets Act, for example, already addresses some of these issues.
Right. trying to level the playing field for smaller companies against the gatekeepers.
This U.S. ruling adds another layer to that global pressure on dominant App Store models.
So, we could see a broader evolution of how app stores work everywhere.
That's the long-term potential. More openness, more competition in payments and distribution.
Which, theoretically, is better for developers and consumers.
That's the argument the regulators and companies like Epic are making.
Apple, of course, argues their model is necessary for security, privacy, and maintaining their ecosystem.
And they argue the fees are fair compensation for the value they provide through the platform.
It's the fundamental disagreement at the heart of this whole battle.
It really is, and this latest ruling suggests the court is siding with Epic's view on the need for more competition.
Especially with that willful violation finding.
That part is hard to ignore, it speaks to intent.
And the referral for criminal contempt investigation is just next level.
It elevates it from a civil business dispute to something potentially more serious, impacting individuals.
Alex Roman, the VP of Finance, I bet he's having a rough week.
One can only imagine being called out by name by a federal judge for mysterious and outright lies is not a career highlight.
Understatement of the year. So, to recap, Apple violated the order by trying to charge a 27 fee on external purchases and using discouraging warnings.
Yes, and hindering developer communication.
And the judge said, nope, not allowed, immediately barring the fee and the communication blocks.
Effective immediately, no staying the ruling.
And then dropped the bombshell of the criminal contempt referral.
Along with the finding of willful violation and issues with Apple's conduct during the proceedings.
Wow, it feels like this case is really shaping the future of digital marketplaces.
It's definitely a landmark case. The outcome will influence how platforms and developers interact for years to come.
And the fight isn't over yet with Apple appealing.
Not over by a long shot. We'll be watching the appeal process closely.
And waiting to see what the federal prosecutors decide regarding the contempt referral.
That part introduces a whole new level of uncertainty.
So, for developers, immediate relief on fees and communication. But still an evolving situation.
Exactly. They can start implementing changes based on this ruling, but with the knowledge that appeals are ongoing.
And for consumers, keep an eye out for developers potentially offering alternative payment options or different pricing.
Hopefully leading to some savings down the line.
And the big return of Fortnite. That's definitely something many listeners will be excited about.
A lot of iOS gamers have missed it. Its return is a direct consequence of this ruling.
It really underscores how impactful these legal battles are on what apps we can use and how we use them.
Completely. It's not just abstract legal theory, it affects the apps in our pockets.
So, what's the next date we should be looking for?
The appeal process will take time, possibly months or longer. The criminal investigation is on its own timeline.
So, patience is key, but the direction seems clear. The court wants more competition.
That's the strong message from Judge Gonzalez Rogers.
And calling out Apple's previous attempts as willful violation really puts teeth into it.
It does. It leaves little room for interpretation of their past actions.
This is definitely a story we'll keep following on It Takes Two.
Absolutely. As soon as there are new developments in the appeal or the potential criminal investigation, we'll break it down for you.
Because this case is far from over.
It is indeed the saga that keeps on giving, legally speaking.
Hopefully giving more choice and fairer terms in the end.
That's the stated goal of the injunction, after all.
Well, this was a dense topic, but so important for understanding the digital economy.
Definitely. The power of platforms is a hot topic, and this is a prime example playing out in court.
And the fact that it involves Fortnite and Apple makes it relatable for so many people.
Bringing the abstract legal stuff into the apps they use every day.
So, Apple has to immediately allow developers to communicate freely and stop the 27 fee.
That's the key takeaway for developers right now.
No more scare screens, no more punitive fees on external links.
Theoretically creating a more competitive environment for payments.
And the criminal contempt angle, that's just wild.
It adds a whole new layer of gravity to the situation.
It's not just about money anymore, it's about potentially breaking the law by ignoring a court order.
And lying to the court according to the judge.
Yikes. That escalated quickly.
Over for years, but yes, this latest step is a significant escalation.
So we watch the appeals court and the federal prosecutors.
That's the plan, and see how Apple revises its policies in the interim.
Will they finally make a compliance effort that the court deems sufficient?
Given the judge's strong words, they likely have to take it much more seriously this time.
Especially with the criminal contempt possibility looming.
Indeed, that's a powerful motivator.
All right, Ethan. I think we've covered the ins and outs of this ruling.
We've certainly tried to unpack it. It's a complex, but crucial story.
And one with real-world implications for everyone who uses apps.
Thanks for breaking it down with me, Naomi.
Always a pleasure, Ethan. It takes two to tackle these big tech topics.
Couldn't agree more. That's all the time we have for today.
Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our updates on this case and other tech news.
You can find us on all your favorite podcast platforms.
And check out our website for show notes and links to the articles we discussed.
Until next time, I'm Ethan.
And I'm Naomi.
And this was It Takes Two.
See ya.